Medieval people did not live with a sense of future, not because they lacked imagination, but because the future was never something that could be trusted. Tomorrow was not a promise, it was a question, and often a dangerous one. Life was lived close to the present moment, not out of philosophy but out of necessity. Planning too far ahead was meaningless when so many things could end life suddenly. Disease, hunger, war, fire, and accident hovered constantly, unseen but always near. People woke up without knowing what the day would bring. Illness could appear overnight. A fever could begin before dawn and end a life by evening. A healthy body in the morning meant nothing by nightfall. There was no sense of progress. Time did not feel like a line moving forward. It felt like a cycle that could break at any point. Seasons repeated, but survival did not improve. Children grew up watching uncertainty. They learned early that adults were not permanent. Parents vanished, siblings disappeared, familiar faces were gone without warning. This was not shocking, it was expected. Death was woven into daily life. Bodies were seen, touched, prepared, and buried by family members. People did not hide death from children. There was no way to. Marriage was not planned around long futures. It was about survival in the present. Partnerships formed quickly. Love existed, but it was shaped by impermanence. People learned to attach deeply while expecting loss. Women lived with constant uncertainty. Pregnancy was dangerous. Each birth carried the possibility of death. There was no way to know if a woman would survive childbirth or if a child would survive the first weeks of life. Men lived with uncertainty of strength. Injury meant decline. A broken leg could end a livelihood. A damaged hand could end survival. Bodies were tools, and tools wore out quickly. Food defined the rhythm of life. People did not think about what they would eat next year. They thought about the next meal, the next week, the next winter. A good harvest meant temporary relief, not security. Hunger taught people to live cautiously. Grain was counted. Bread was measured. Waste was dangerous. Excess was rare. Weather ruled everything. Rain was feared as much as drought. Frost could erase months of labor overnight. Sun could burn crops beyond recovery. People watched the sky more than they watched rulers. Faith offered explanation where knowledge failed. God was believed to control events. If the future was unknowable, it was because it belonged to divine will. This belief did not remove fear, but it gave it structure. Prayer was not comfort alone, it was preparation. People prayed not for happiness, but for endurance. They asked for strength to face what might come, because what would come was never clear. Homes reflected uncertainty. They were built to last just long enough. Repairs were constant. Collapse was expected. Fire, rot, and weather erased structures as easily as they erased lives. Work filled every day, not for advancement, but for continuation. There was no guarantee that effort would be rewarded. Hard work could still end in starvation or disease. Illness arrived without warning. People did not know why they became sick or who would recover. Treatments were inconsistent and often harmful. Waiting was often the only option. Pain was accepted as part of life. There was no expectation that suffering could be avoided. Relief was temporary. Endurance was admired. Cities did not offer certainty. They multiplied risk. Crowded streets spread disease. Fires moved fast. Violence was common. Leaving home carried danger. Staying home carried different danger. Travel was a gamble. Roads were unsafe. Distance meant exposure. Every journey carried the possibility of disappearance. Many left and never returned. Time was measured differently. People counted life in winter survived, not years lived. Milestones were practical, not symbolic. Survival itself was the achievement. There was little belief in control. Fate, God, and chance shaped existence. People adapted psychologically by lowering expectations. Hope existed, but it was cautious. Plans were flexible because they had to be. A future imagined too clearly was often a future that never arrived. Medieval people lived with an awareness that life could collapse without warning. This awareness shaped behavior, morality, and emotion. They loved knowing they might lose. They worked, knowing it might not matter. They prayed, knowing answers might never come. The future was not empty. It was dangerous. And yet life continued, day after day, inside that uncertainty. Living without knowing what came next shaped how medieval people thought about everything. Fear was not constant panic. It was a background pressure, always present, shaping decisions quietly. People learned not to ask too many questions about tomorrow. Expectation led to disappointment. Certainty led to loss. Survival required emotional restraint. Joy existed, but it was immediate. Feasts mattered because they might be the last. Celebrations were intense because repetition was not guaranteed. Happiness was taken when it appeared. Promises were fragile. Oaths were serious because life was unstable. Breaking a promise carried weight, not because of law, but because the future was already uncertain enough. Parents raised children with realism, not optimism. They taught skills early. They taught obedience and caution. There was no belief that life would become easier later. Education was practical. Knowledge meant survival, not progress. Knowing how to work, repair, and endure mattered more than knowing why the world worked as it did. Illness forced people to confront uncertainty constantly. No one knew who would recover and who would not. The sick waited. Families waited. Outcomes arrived without explanation. When death came, it was accepted quickly. Mourning existed, but life continued. Fields still needed work. Animals still needed care. Grief did not pause survival. Communities adapted rituals around uncertainty. Funerals were simple. Burials were frequent. Death lost shock, but not meaning. Faith provided a language for uncertainty. God's will explained what could not be predicted. Fate was not resignation. It was a way to live without answers. Some people found comfort in belief. Others lived in fear of judgment. Either way, the future remained unknown. Violence reinforced uncertainty. Conflicts erupted suddenly. Raids destroyed homes overnight. Safety could vanish without warning. Natural disasters erased certainty completely. Floods, fires, and plagues reminded people that control was an illusion. Survivors learned not to expect fairness. The good suffered. The cruel survived. Morality did not guarantee outcome. People adapted by narrowing focus. Today mattered more than next year. Endurance replaced ambition. Love was shaped by this reality. People loved fully but briefly. Attachment did not mean permanence. Loss was assumed. Aging brought no clarity. Reaching later life did not mean safety. Weakness increased risk. Dependence returned vulnerability. Even religion did not promise a predictable future on earth. Salvation was delayed beyond life. Existence remained unstable until death. Living without knowing what came next trained medieval people to exist in uncertainty without collapsing under it. They learned to move forward without vision. This did not make them passive. It made them resilient. Their lives were not guided by plans but by adaptation. Not by progress, but by persistence. The future was not a destination. It was something to survive. Medieval people did not ask what they would become. They asked if they would still be alive, And each morning that answer remained unclear.